Now, leaders, if we're not careful, one of the things I found out very early on, I wanted to dictate the process. My job's not to dictate the process. My job is to dictate the goal. If my goal is X percentage of growth in a certain department over the next year, I don't need to care how they get there as long as they're doing it biblically, ethically, morally, and they're like following the vision of the church. Because the other part of that too is when we receive criticism, we can also be critical as leaders because we think, well, it's being carried out, so it obviously needs to be carried out how I think it does. Maybe Jesus told him to go into all the world and teach, baptizing them. Did you notice, other than giving them the way to baptize, he didn't tell them how to teach. He demonstrated it and then, hey, go do this.
Welcome, everyone. Today we are blessed to be joined by Evan Grizzle. Evan is an author and the lead pastor of Apostolic Tabernacle in Wilmington, North Carolina. He is also the co-host of the Grizzles Podcast, which is part of the Biblos Network. In this episode, Evan shares his journey from small-town Virginia to pastoring in North Carolina, reflecting on leadership, church planting, and navigating criticism. He unpacks lessons from his book, Navigating the Noise, while exploring personal growth, openness in ministry, and much more. Welcome to the podcast. It's good to have you with us today.
Man, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for opening up this forum for us to be able to sit down and talk today.
Yeah, it was good to briefly meet you before we pressed record, but typically what I like to do with these conversations is to have the audience get to know the guest a little bit. So give the opportunity to share a little bit about your story, where you come from, your background, kind of like, your perspective on sort of things, so they get a good idea about what we're talking about. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about where you come from, your background, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I grew up in southwestern Virginia in the United States, just north of the Tennessee border where Virginia and Tennessee meet, in a little town called Gate City, Virginia. I think there's 2,500 homes in that town. There's 3 red lights. Like it's small. It's not the no red light town, but it's decently small. I grew up the son of a loving mom and dad. My dad was a coal miner in the mountains of southwestern Virginia and eastern Kentucky. My mom was a stay-at-home mom and a Christian school teacher. Just happened that's where I went to school. My uncle pastored from the earliest times I can remember. Actually, just a couple years ago, we celebrated their 40-year anniversary for their church and their school, or their church and his pastorate. And it's pretty awesome. So my grandparents came into church when my grandpa was 32, my grandmother was 27. She's in her 80s now. My grandpa's since passed, but looking at them and the prayers and the life that they've lived, the prayers that they put up for their family, almost everyone, actually, let me rephrase that. Every one of their children and grandchildren are in church, are serving God, are living for God. And it's been a pretty awesome thing to grow up in that kind of atmosphere. I grew up in a very in a home that loved God. It was very like a religiously conservative home, and centered around music, centered around church. I played sports in high school, but man, sports revolved around church because I went to the Christian school, right? So no practices that interfered with church and like that kind of thing. And at 17, I graduated. I got my associate's degree in respiratory therapy. I worked as a respiratory therapist for 10 years, working nights, got my bachelor's in business, then a master's in leadership. But it was about 12 years old that somebody prophesied over me that they're like, you're going to be a pastor. And, at 12, you're like, okay, cool. Where's the PlayStation at? Like, it didn't really click. And if you would have met me as a teenager, young adult, you'd have been like, everyone thought I was doing everything I could to not pastor a church. Everybody would have thought I would have been out of church, actually. And it's been an interesting journey to see how God can take somebody that grew up on a pew and really just produce a love for him through an actual relationship. And that's kind of where I'm at now, where I met my wife when I was 23. And we got married a year after meeting. We've been married now going on 11 years, this is our 12th year, going in our 12th year of marriage. We have 3 wonderful kids. We pastor an awesome church here in Wilmington, North Carolina, right on the coast of North Carolina. So we're right on the East Coast, and man, God's just doing some awesome things. And to see where it was kind of funny when I got this question to look at where I was, and I don't do that often, and just lay those dots out. And it's like, wow, I don't know how we did it, Lord, but you're going to take all the credit. It's pretty cool that we're here. So that's kind of a brief overview of my life up to this point.
Yeah, that question's always interesting because it's like, I don't know how often I even look back at where I've come from and the journey that God's taken me on. And,
Yeah.
it's just like year after year goes by, and then you look back, it's like, wow, a lot's changed.
Yeah.
I'm a lot further down the road than I realized. And it's interesting the last few years, and we're around the same age. The last few years, just really beginning to start realizing where you're at on
Mm-hmm.
the spectrum of leadership, and it's like, wow, okay, I'm now old enough to where I'm kind of disconnected from youth a bit, and people are sort of like starting to
Yeah.
maybe listen to what I have to say because I've got enough years under my belt to where
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can actually add a bit of value. But yeah, really cool, awesome story, and
Thank you.
where you come from. You talked a little bit there about your ministry experience and your leadership and what you've been doing. Do you want to expound on that a little bit more, or are you happy
Yeah.
with it there?
No, I'd be happy to. Whenever looking at leadership and ministry, it's so funny. People are like, "How did you get to where you're going?" And it's a cool thing to look back and say, "Okay, this is how I got there." Because when I was in it, I had no clue where I was headed. God to me has been a God of stepping stones. I started playing the bass when I was 7. I really fell in love with it at about 12. At 15, I started leading worship because the worship leader started working nights during the week. So I started leading worship every Wednesday night. And then he started working rotations. And so every other Sunday I was leading worship a couple years later. And then I preached my first message, and then that grew. And it's always like God was so kind in giving me the space of grace to where I could do it, but mess up and it'd be okay. And that's kind of where it springboarded at about 20. I preached my first message when I was about 20 years old. And I had talked and done things like that. But since that point, I still lead worship now. But in 2020, in 2014, my wife and I got married. In 13 and 14, we moved to Wilmington, North Carolina, and we began a slow transition to take over the church here in Wilmington. And everybody knows what happened in 2020. It's like, okay, that did happen, and everything did shut down across the world. And September of that year, we were voted in as pastors. We were installed in December of that year. And ever since then, we've been pastoring the church here in Wilmington, and I served as family pastor before that. And now it's interesting. So I kind of watched, and this is kind of will hit home for you a little bit too. I think is about 2 years ago, God began to put a burden in my heart to plant churches. We have a great church here, but it can sustain church planting now, or it's headed that direction to be able to do it more. And like God put it in my heart. And about that time, I went to a church conference. A dear friend doesn't like prophesying over peers, but came up to me and said, "Man, God showed me a vision of you, and he's breaking pieces of your heart. And he was planting it in different cities throughout the region around you." And it just so happened that my wife and I and God were the only people that knew we wanted to plant churches, and it just confirmed it. And so now we're starting this journey of church planting. We planted our first last year, Spanish work here in Wilmington. We're going to be planting our second, hopefully next year. And the goal is by the time I retire is to plant 15. It's a lot of churches, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at. I serve on a Missions America board for this organization, the church organization I'm a part of, which is Home Missions, and so I'm just kind of trying to keep my hands in that, because that seems like it's going to be the future for us. That feels that's the vision our church has. And so, man, ministry's been a wild ride. Taking over at 30, how old was I? I guess I was 30, 31, and started pastoring a church. My father-in-law, he retired at 60, which is relatively young for a pastor to retire in the States. And man, you talk about a transition. Transitions are hard on everybody, They're hard on the incoming, they're hard on the outgoing, and they're hard on the people. And it's just difficult. And boy, I tell you what, 5 years later, here we are, unified, just ready to kick the devil in the teeth. And it's pretty cool watching ministry unfold like that.
Yeah, transitions are especially difficult if there's been a long-serving pastor,
Yeah.
and if they've been serving for over a decade or so, then the church has to sort of and the good thing is you were there for a number of years before he took over, so
Yeah.
that's helpful. But getting used to a new personality, a new way of doing things, a new communication style,
Yeah.
it is a challenge for sure.
Yeah. And I'm a big personality. Like I'm a big dude and I have a big personality. And it's interesting. We've, transitioned. Leadership's not easy. For anybody that thinks it is, like you're just reading a textbook. You're not living it. And leadership's difficult sometimes. But I've been fighting battles now that look different than when I first started fighting battles when I'm in my pastorate. And I was talking to an older gentleman. He's 20 years older than me. He's been pastoring, 4 times as long as I have. And he said, Evan, you're further along than you think, because now you're fighting battles of leadership philosophy. And he said, I didn't fight that until I was 15 years in. So I'm one of those like shoot first, ask question later kind of guy. Like, let's just do it, because it's going to hurt whether we do it slow or we do it fast. Let's rip the Band-Aid off and so, yeah, transitions can be rough, especially when you got a big personality like me. Like I had to, God's taught me a lot about my stupidity my foolishness in the last 5 years. And he shaped me a lot, and I'm thankful for that. Good Lord.
Well, and it seems you've applied some of those lessons to this book that you've put out. But before we get to that, I love that you guys are planting churches, and you alluded to it, but yeah, we planted a church a couple years ago. We're about our church is about an hour and a half north of the main campus, and so we do services in the morning, and then we travel up and actually tomorrow going to baptize 2 young ladies up there, which we're really excited about.
Bro,
and
thank you, Jesus.
God's
That's
building
awesome.
this church. But yeah, our main campus, we've been able to plant, I think it's 4 churches in the last 4 churches in the last 2 years. So
man,
once you get the ball rolling, it seems daunting, but when you throw out a number like 15, it's like, oh man, I don't know if that's possible, but it's definitely possible. Once you get the ball rolling, once you get the church behind it, and you start seeing leadership piling up, if you're good at developing leaders and you start seeing leadership sort of pile up at the church, well, they got to go somewhere. There aren't enough roles within the main campus. And so it's always good to keep people busy planting churches and reaching areas where, that's the way you're going to reach the world, is through planting churches, for sure.
Man, that's it. We could quit the podcast now. I got what I needed. That's incredible. That's my encouragement. Like, I'm great. Okay, we're good.
Well, no, we're really excited to talk to you about this book here, this book that you put out. You mentioned beforehand, this isn't your first one, but this is your first one through Truth Book Co. And I just want to put it up. I'll put up on the camera for those who are watching. It's called Navigating the Noise. And would you mind sharing a little bit about the backstory of this book, how you came about writing it?
Yeah. Shout out to Truth Book Co. before I go further, or I'll forget. I self-published on the first one. Leadership Game Plan was the title of it. And it was 15 leadership lessons for people to be able to develop leaders within their church, make a leadership pipeline. Well, self-publishing is a bear, and Truth Book Co. made it so much easier. And I'm so thankful for everything they're doing. They made this connection here, which I'm thankful for. But to talk about this book, most of what we do as leaders tends to come from lessons that we've learned, right? It would be very disingenuous of us, and we've all done it. Pastors we can speak from experience, we can speak from knowledge, and usually experience is the one that brings about the most wisdom, because that wisdom makes it applicable to the people that hear it. And this one was the same way. I am a people-pleasing machine. Like, I don't want people to be mad at me. I don't want people to be upset at me. When I know someone is, it eats at me until I can't sleep, And I knew that if I was dealing with that, someone else had to be too. And so it made me take thoughts about criticism, because when you are a people pleaser, all feedback tends to feel like criticism. I heard a gentleman say recently, he said, unsolicited advice often sounds like criticism. Concerns, if they're not brought to the person that the topic of the concern, a concern can sound like criticism. And what I found was that, man, I was trying to make so many people happy because I was hearing so many criticisms, so many ideas, so many things, so much feedback on ideas I was throwing out. And I'm learning now how to voice those things to where it doesn't solicit as much feedback, if that makes sense. It acts more of a directive than a question. But early on, man, the feedback would kill me. And I started making notes of like, okay, this, and my wife's a marriage and family therapist. And so I'm in touch with my feelings far more than most. And so I just started talking about my, like, writing down feelings. And that's where it came from, was I started writing these things down. And I'm like, man, I know if I'm dealing with this, it may not be a huge number of the population, but somebody else has to be. So hopefully something I've learned can help someone else learn also before it takes them out of ministry altogether.
And so you talk about criticism, and obviously that's the foundation of what you're exploring in the book. But sort of early on in the early chapters, you talk about changing the way that you view criticism. So you kind of highlighted what can be taken as criticism, but as a leader or as a church worker looking at criticism in a new light, would you mind explaining what you mean by that when you're saying change the way you view it, and why that really is so important, especially when it comes to church work?
Yeah. One of the things that people often do is they view criticism as opposition. If someone comes with an idea that is contrary, and I have people on our team, some of the best people on our team, if you toss them an idea, they will take the idea and they will just pick it apart until either nothing's left or the best parts are. And a lot of times our ideas are very personal to us, and they feel so personal that it feels like an attack. And that's where that feeling of opposition comes in. But if we can reframe it, criticism, as an opportunity rather than opposition, right? I think me and you were talking about this for the podcast, being kind of out of touch with youth age kids, right? I heard one the other day called ops, or your op. I'm like, what is that? And they're like, opposition. I'm like, I live where the special operations units of the U.S. military are Fort Bragg and Fort Liberty. Yeah. So I was thinking special ops, not opposition. And so when I heard that, I'm like, man, there's so many times we view people as oppositional to us because even their questions sound like criticism, right? And what we have to do is we have to reframe that. It's not an opposition to us. It's an opportunity, at the very least, for explanation, to where people can capture the idea and continue with you. But at the very best, it's an opportunity for personal growth as well.
And you talk about, you highlight in the first section of the book, you highlight the role criticism plays, or exploring it on the individual and on the leader. And you just unpacked a little bit there about the way we should be viewing criticism. But why is it so difficult for leaders to handle? I think we all have a bit of an idea, but you definitely explore it. It's not like 2 sentences or a paragraph that you cover this, but you actually dive into it, which is why I asked the question. It seems like a simple question, but would you mind sharing a little bit as to why it is that difficult for us to experience criticism?
Yeah. The word that keeps coming to my mind is, it feels like an attack. It's a part of our ideas usually become a part of our identity, and it feels like an attack on who we are. And that is a mental and emotional aspect, but it's also a very spiritual aspect too, because I don't know, and no good pastor, no good leader, let me rephrase that. Any good pastor and any good leader would take their thoughts and their ideas to prayer before they would voice those thoughts and ideas to others. Especially, if there's a confidant, a very close friend, that's one thing. But when you're talking about a group of people that you're leading, you have thought through those things well. And there's this idea, it was Stephen King when he wrote about being an author, and he said you have to go back and remove things, and he called it killing your children or killing your babies, because all of those sentences were so dear to you that you wrote in a book. Our ideas are the same way. Our thoughts, our actions, our behaviors, wherever the criticism is coming from, it may be of something we've said, something we've done, and that's the thing. It's so dear to us. And the other part of that is sometimes, let's say it's not more than just a thought. It's more than just an idea. Maybe it was an action that's being criticized. Then you're looking at intention as well. We know our actions. We know why we did it. No one else knows the intent. God knows the intentions of the heart. And sometimes hearing someone accuse you of having malintent, bad intentions, oh, how hurtful that can be whenever it's taken that direction. And so I think the idea that I'm trying to grasp and grow in is removing my emotions from criticism so that I can see the criticism clearly. Because when a person comes to you with criticism, a lot of times, if you called me randomly, this is the first time we've ever met, and you said, hey, bro, that was the worst podcast I've ever done. There's no way I'm airing that. I'd be like, oh, man, that sounds like criticism. We don't know each other that well. I don't know if this is a one-off moment for you, if that's the nature of who you are. Now, from the little time we spent together, I know that's probably not going to happen. That's not your nature. My wife, I know her nature. I spend intimate time with her. If she has a moment where she's hateful, that's out of her nature. And so sometimes we can measure. We really need to look at the criticism and measure. And I might be kind of going off a little bit here, but it's kind of following the train of thought in my mind. We need to look at where the criticism's rooted. Is this person constantly critical?
Yeah.
Because that might be their nature. If it is a concern and that person is bought in and they're bringing that to you, they have my back. This is not a critical person. They really see something that can do better here. But that person who's every time you talk to them, there's something that needs to be done better. That's a little bit more. You're like, okay, you're just being a critical person. So we're moving our emotions from that, so we don't take it so personal. And we look at all of those avenues, and the book goes over that, the different emotional, mental aspects, the spiritual aspects, but also the nature of people, and knowing, hey, this person's critical all the time. They're going to be critical of the one after you. They were probably critical of the one before you, and it doesn't matter. If they go to heaven, they're probably going to be critical when they get there too. I don't know.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is you talked about it a little bit at the very beginning. We were talking about your personality. And, for some people, like it is a big challenge trying to get over this hurdle of criticism, which is why I think it's a great thing that you're doing by addressing it in the way that you are, giving people this opportunity, especially people with a personality like yours. If you're a people pleaser, you really need to reevaluate how you're looking at criticism if it's constantly causing you problems. Fortunately and unfortunately, I think for me, my personality isn't necessarily along those lines, and that can get you in a bit of trouble because you can just like disregard people and their emotions, and so I get in trouble on that end. But on the other end, it's like, yeah, okay, I get you're critical, but I'm sort of focused on really focused on the action and trying to get it done and that sort of thing. And sometimes that can be a negative as well. So, your personality is important, and understanding this topic is important. And also realizing, like you said, the intent of the individual. Is this constructive criticism? Are they just trying to tear you down because they don't like
Yeah.
you? One of the things that I try to tell people, because you face criticism, and it doesn't seem to bother me as much, at least I've noticed with other people, is like, you know, look at the voice and say, okay, well,
Mhm.
is this person wanting to add value? And why am I allowing
So
them
good.
into my head if these people don't care about me? They don't care about my family. They don't even care about the vision.
Yeah.
And I'm allowing them to dictate, what I'm thinking about. I'm allowing them to affect my mood with my
That's
family.
so good.
Don't give it to them.
That's it. What do they say? They're living rent free, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's the idea. And the part of that too is we think, oh, this person's against me. I have found this has been my personal experience. Most people aren't against you. They're just really for themselves.
Yeah, that's such a good
And
point.
if we can get them out of that, and listen, I've came to this place, and I'll share this probably at the very end of the podcast of like the vision of this church is going to come through the lens. This is our church in particular, and I would say most churches, but our church in particular is going to be projected through the lens of the individual. So for people on my team, my goal is to cast the vision so that they'll catch it, but know that when they catch it, they're going to the fulfillment of that may look a little bit different than how I think it should, because it's through their lens and their context. Now, leaders, if we're not careful, one of the things I found out very early on, I wanted to dictate the process. My job's not to dictate the process. My job is to dictate the goal. If my goal is X percentage of growth in a certain department over the next year, I don't need to care how they get there, as long as they're doing it biblically, ethically, morally, and they're doing a service under the following the vision of the church. And that's the thing is like, man, because the other part of that too is when we receive criticism, we can also be critical as leaders because we think, well, it's being carried out, so it obviously needs to be carried out how I think it does. Maybe Jesus told him to go into all the world and teach, baptizing them. Did you notice, other than giving them the way to baptize, he didn't tell them how to teach. He demonstrated it, and then, hey, go do this. And I think we kind of have to be okay with that, which is, that's out there in left field, completely away from what we're talking about right now. But man, I'm jealous of your not caring what people think, though. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, I think I care. Like, obviously, you can't go too far, and then if you are saying you're going that far, then maybe you're not being honest. So obviously, I care to a degree, but definitely doesn't affect me as much as it seems to affect some of my peers or my friends. Which again could be a positive or a negative, like what you were just talking about. Someone who can be critical, I can find myself going in that direction if I allow myself, where you're just critiquing everything, you're tearing everything down. Oh, if it's not my idea, then it's not a good idea. Well, you can't be that way either. And so there are positives and negatives, right? With our personality leanings. And just because you might not you might not be as affected by criticism, you can find yourself being the person that's critical, and you're forcing these people to grow in grace. You're forcing the people around you to have to deal with your criticism.
Yeah, that's so good. There's a book I read, Leader. Oh man, I can't remember the name of it, but it's so good. And Steve Cuss was the author, and I remember that name because his Instagram handle is Steve Cusswords, which made me laugh. And it's a religious book. It's just very funny. And one of the things that he said was that everybody's gifting has a shadow. So your shadow, like you said, is that part, that you just talked about. The gifting is that it doesn't impact you as much. The shadow and my shadow of people pleasing, that people tell me I'm very personable. I'm glad. But I think that comes from a little bit from my personality style. The problem with being so personable is you want everybody to like you. Well, then you turn into a people pleaser. So there goes the shadow of my strength shows its weakness, right? So that's so good. I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah, and I think your wife's background would help you with that, and being aware of your personality and the positives and the negatives is half the battle. But it's not the whole battle. You got to actually be intentional about what you're doing. Yeah.
Exactly.
So we talked about criticism when it comes to the individual. You also address it when it comes to the organization. How is it that you can apply criticism effectively within the organization, or changing the culture in the way that criticism is handled? Positive, negative, so on and so forth. Would you mind? You don't have to go too much into that, because we want people to buy the book. We want people to read it.
100%.
So we don't want to share all of it here.
Yeah. The good news is I can't remember very much of what I wrote in the book already, because it's been so long since I put it out there. I'm going to have to read it again. But, I think one of the things is we deal with criticism as individuals. Let me rephrase that. We deal with feedback all the time. We deal with feedback when you're a pastor and you preach something and that one saint doesn't show up the next service, right? Like it's a constant feedback loop. And so individually, we can be adept at handling it. The problem is, as an organization, how do we handle criticism? And if you were to take a survey, especially in most Western cultures where they're used to some type of hierarchical figure, a pastor, a CEO, that type of thing, there's a reason why they do anonymous surveys in Fortune 500 companies, because you need to be able to give your honest feedback without fear of any type of repercussion, right? And we did this game at our church, and it's the John Maxwell Leadership Game. My wife and then another gentleman in the church are certified in that. And one of the questions was, do you feel comfortable taking feedback to the pastor? It was overwhelmingly no. The two people that did were the two people, my wife and the guy who's our admin pastor. They feel comfortable bringing me feedback. And that showed me, this was about 2 or 3-ish years into our pastorate. I'm like, whoa, we got to figure something out here, because we're not handling criticism effectively. There's two ways that people can give you feedback. They can give you feedback openly, or they can do it privately behind your back. Mm-hmm. No matter what, they're going to be talking about their issues and their circumstances in the church. Now, you have to be strong on some things, but you cannot be a type of person where they cannot bring issues or concerns to you. Now, here's what it will do. I set up a rule for our leaders. If it is not important enough to bring to me, it's probably not important enough to talk to somebody else about in a negative way, right? So what it does is it says, well, I really only get the important things. And those people know, well, I wouldn't talk to him about it, so it's not that big of a deal. Because another reason criticism can be such a bad thing is it's also very personal. It's what they think should be done. Mm.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they don't have, and you know this as a pastor, there's a 30,000-foot view of the church that we know how intricate every little thing is, that the relationships, these two people right here haven't gotten along in a few weeks, and this right here has happened over here. And not everyone in the church knows that. So when people ask you a question, well, why did you do this? I always tell them, I will tell you as much as I can, the best I can, as to why it was done. And if I can't, I'll tell you, I'm sorry, I really can't tell you why we did this. Just trust me, we really had to do it. And what it does is it breeds that openness that they can bring their concern. They can bring their ideas. They can bring their worries, their fears, their criticisms, right? Because and then what you'll find is if they got to set up a meeting, it's worth it. If it's worth it, it can help you grow, or it can help them grow. So it's a win-win, unless we go back to the nature part. And then that person's beating your phone down, just like ringing off the hook. Hey, I need to talk. We talked last week. This is something different. Well, shoot, we talked the week before that too. And you start seeing the nature. And so it's important as organizations that we start talking about, we start figuring out how to handle the criticism, because in the American culture in particular, we're coming to a time in the church where people want to know why, and they have to be able to get the why from the right person. And so you have to be open to criticism, to questions that sound like criticism, so that they can get the answers that they need to have.
Yeah, I think that's good. And the other side of that, so that's like criticism from an individual perspective and
Hmm.
addressing that and being open to it, which is so important. And the other thing you address is also being, I guess, critical within maybe even the leadership team, where the leadership team
Yeah.
is looking at the church and it's not just everything's rosy, everything's perfect. Oh, let's look at this and okay, how can we change this? How can we do this better? And that's one thing that we do here at the Pentecostals of Sydney is we're pretty critical of our systems. Like every year we have a leadership getaway sort of thing, and then
Awesome.
a portion of that, an hour and a half or 2 hours of that, is looking at what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, and trying to address some of those things. And yeah, I mean, I struggle with those sometimes because I'm the administrator here. I'm involved with a lot of the day to day stuff, and it's like when they're criticizing that, it's like, oh, are they criticizing me? They're criticizing my work.
Mm,
They're criticizing my view of doing things. But pastors taught us over the years, you have to be open to that because if you don't, you're not going to change, you're not going to evolve, and you may miss out on growth opportunities just simply because you're shutting down any sort of critical view.
yeah. And I venture to say that's very wise of your pastor. I venture to say you all would not have 4 church plants if your pastor did not create and foster that type of culture, because those people that bring those things to you, you can find the biggest doers in your church when you allow those people to have a seat at the table and talk. Because
Yeah.
if they are critically thinking about this, now there's a difference between critical thinking and thinking critically,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we can be critical thinkers and work through things, or we can just be a critical person. Those are 2 different things. And whenever you're allowing that person that can pick those things apart to have a seat at the table, they'll be some of your best leaders and some of your best pastors because they have that 30,000 foot view, like we just talked about. That's so good.
Yeah, one of the ways I jokingly try to differentiate between a critical thinker and someone who's critical is the idea that they bring, giving them the opportunity to institute it. You find out real quick
That's
who
good.
actually who actually wants to do something, or they're just being
Yeah.
critical.
Hey, joke, bro. I'm so glad you said that. We do, like, I'll do that. Somebody will be like, hey, I had an idea. I'm like, awesome. Do it and let me know how it works out. Like, if it don't, they're just, oh, you're just wanting to be lazy and make me do more work, aren't you?
Yeah, you're just giving us more tasks.
That's it. That's it. That's so good.
So where can people find this book? I think it's not a long read, so it's not something that's going to take way too much of your time, but it's got a
Yeah.
lot of really good information, especially for leaders, but even just for people who work within the church. You don't necessarily have to be a leader to get something out of this book. I mean, you could apply it to, like, say you're a business owner or you're involved in
Yeah.
leadership in a business setting. These sorts of things apply across. So where can they get it?
Yeah. Go to Amazon.com. You can go there, type in Navigating the Noise, and you can put Evan Grizzle. It'll pop up. You can go to Truth Book Co. Just Google them. And whenever you go get this book, if you get this book, I would encourage you, first of all, let me thank you for getting the book, but I would encourage you to take this and take it to people on your team and read the book together and let it be a conversation starter, because everything in the book may not be applicable to you or your team, but what I'm hoping it will do is it'll create conversations that will bring applicable things to your team, things that will work because you started this conversation. So yeah, Amazon.com, go there. I'm going to try to do a giveaway pretty soon on my Instagram at Evan Grizzle, where you can get a free signed copy. So yeah, just be on the lookout there too.
All right, cool. We'll link that in the show notes and in the description. You guys will be able to find a direct link to that if you don't want to bother Googling. Just click in the show notes. And also we'll put Evan's handle there as well as Truth Book Co. So you can make sure you're staying connected with what's going on. Man, this has been awesome. It's been awesome getting to meet you and have this conversation.
You as well.
So glad that they set this up, and grateful for your time, grateful for your energy and your commitment to writing this book. Last year, I contributed a number of chapters to a project, and this is not an easy endeavor. You know, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of effort, and obviously, it's driven by a God dream. So it's really cool that you put this out, and it's going to be impacting people. But I like to give all of my guests the opportunity to leave a word with the audience. something unique for the podcast here. So if you don't mind leaving us with a word as we finish off here, Evan, thanks again for your time.
Thank you. It was about a year ago, I stood in a newly renovated sanctuary, and I was wrestling with changing the future direction of our church. We own 6.5 acres of land. Plan was to build. It wasn't in my heart, and I knew God was pulling us a different direction to stay at our current campus, which is the size of a city block in downtown Wilmington. And here we got room to expand, and we got 6.5 acres of land that's paid for that can fund an expansion here, plus plant churches, pretty much just off the interest of investments. And so I was praying one night, and all of a sudden, God asked me this question, and I want to ask you this question. What would you do if you only feared me? So the question to you is, what would you do if you only feared God? If you weren't worried about what other people thought of you, if you weren't worried about your falling, if you weren't worried about what your peers or your leaders thought about you messing up when you step out onto this limb, what would you do if you only feared him? My prayer is that it would push you to go out and change the world, because the only thing, the whole duty of man is to fear God and to keep his commandments. So I encourage you, when you are finding yourself facing criticism, when you're facing hard times, when you're facing fear, anxiety, just ask yourself that question. What would I do if I only feared God?